But thank you for joining today's webinar. We're going to be talking about business entities and formation. I'm very excited to introduce Zane Johnson. He is from the lovely MZA Legal, and he's going to be presenting today's webinar. He's worked with VIP in the past, and he's pretty awesome. I think you're all going to like him a lot. We're really excited to partner with him again. Just so everyone's aware, this session is being recorded. So if you do not want your face or image in this recording, just turn off your camera. It's not going to be posted anywhere, but it will be sent to you guys after the session. So just be aware of that. I also just wanted to briefly touch base about services available through Philly VIP. If you're not familiar with our services, I know a bunch of you are. We connect small business owners with low to moderate incomes to pro bono legal assistance. We also connect nonprofits that provide direct services to Philadelphians to pro bono assistance as well. So these legal services can range from 1 hour legal consultations, as well as assistance with things like contract drafting, incorporation, corporate governance adjustments, landlord-tenant issues, lease review, property issues, and filing trademark, copyright, patent applications. So if after listening to Zane, you have more questions, you want help, with your business entity, incorporating or changing your business structure, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm going to drop in the chat my email address, as well as our application for small businesses. Please feel free to reach out to me directly or just submit an application online. Thank you for attending, everyone, and I'm going to pass it to Zane.
Thanks, Nina, and good morning, everyone. I definitely want to encourage you all. I'm sure, obviously, you have some familiarity or connection to VIP. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in today's workshop. But I obviously want to encourage you as business owners, nonprofit founders, to take advantage of all the wonderful opportunities and resources and services that they offer. They're all free and you can't beat that. And I know as solopreneurs, as self-funded entrepreneurs, those are the sorts of resources that can really help us get a jump start in terms of, getting us where we need to be, so that we're ready to, take on opportunity as it comes. So it's a pleasure to partner with VIP again. Hopefully, I know that we're, obviously going to have a series over the next couple of months, and hopefully I'll be a face that you'll continue to see as you pop into VIP events. But I'm super excited for this one to talk about business entities and business formation, and really the exciting part, when we're turning our idea into something real. And before we start to get out there and realize, man, this is really hard. This is some of the exciting stuff, right? So being able to kind of think through what's going to be the right business structure for me as I move forward and as I prepare to grow my business, right? And so, of course, I want to start with a disclaimer, because what would a legal workshop be without a disclaimer? And just want to say that all of the information that I provide today is just that, information. So please, hopefully it's information that you'll find useful, that will provide you with clarity. But if you have any questions or anything where you're like, I'm not quite sure if this piece of information that Zane gave me quite applies to my situation, reach out to Philly VIP, reach out to me, reach out to MZA Legal, and get some one-on-one advice, because this isn't really going to be the forum where I would be able to kind of get all of the circumstances surrounding your situation and kind of break down exactly what's going to be right for you. So if there's anything that you're not sure about, reach out, get some help, talk to someone one-on-one, so that you have that clarity in terms of how does this information apply to your situation. So I want to get started with a couple housekeeping things, but before I do that, I'm going to ask you all, kind of as I go through introductions, I want to know kind of where everyone is at in this journey when it comes to choosing a business structure. So if you could just drop in the chat whether or not you are currently have a business structure. So just like a Y or an N, and then if you want to just say, if you want to, say what type of business structure or business entity you have. So whether it's an LLC or a S corp, or you're a sole proprietor, or maybe you don't know, which is fine. That's what we're here to figure out today, right? So and that way I get a chance to kind of see where everyone is at as we kind of dive into the information. So a couple of housekeeping notes, right? We're on Zoom. We're all pretty familiar with Zoom etiquette at this point. We have a lot that we need to get through today. So I'm going to do my best to kind of work our way through all of the information. But if at any point you want to jump in, if you have a question, you can leave it in the chat, or you can feel free to just take yourself off mute and jump in and ask your question. I have no problem with that. As we move through, I definitely want to ask that you put yourself on mute if you're not on mute already. That way, if there's any background noise, it's not going to be distracting to everyone who is in the workshop today. If I say anything that gives you this face right here, it's like, oh, wow, Zane said something interesting. As I said, feel free to just jump right in. You don't have to put it in the chat. You can use the chat if that's helpful to you and you don't want your voice on the recording. But of course, feel free to just jump right in if I say anything that's interesting or gets you thinking or brings up a question. And then when you're done speaking, just remember to hit that mute button so we're not hearing any of that background noise. So now that we've dealt with the housekeeping, I just want to introduce myself really quick. My name is Zane Johnson. I run MZA Legal, and MZA Legal is a virtual Black-owned law firm that focuses on helping self-funded entrepreneurs build a solid foundation for the future growth of their business. So it's, as I said, it's a virtual firm. My license is in Pennsylvania. I'm also licensed in New Jersey, but it's not active. I don't actively practice in New Jersey, but I live in Maryland. So, like I said, it's a virtual law firm. Maybe at some point we'll get into how that all came to be. But fun fact about me, I have officiated 3 weddings for friends. And so, was just kind of thinking, what kind of fun fact could I share? I felt like I wanted to share that one just because in terms of what it says about my personality and what I value curiosity. I'm a curious person in terms of wanting to learn more, in terms of wanting to figure out how things work. And so I think that really drives me as an entrepreneur as well. And I think that is something that a lot of us as entrepreneurs can connect with, because we want to build and we want to create things, and we want to, know the information that's going to allow us to do that and allow us to level up. So hopefully today's webinar and today's workshop will be one of those opportunities for everyone. So we're talking today about business structures, right? And I'm going to take a look really quick, at our answers in terms of where everyone's at. So looks like most of us, a majority of us, have already formed some form of business structure. A lot of LLCs I'm seeing, and then a few people who haven't yet, which is perfect, because now you're getting this opportunity to kind of get some guidance on how you think through choosing the right business entity. So all of you are definitely in the right place this morning. And so, we're going to start today's workshop in terms of the substance and the meat of the presentation by looking at 5 different types of business structures. And so we're going to focus on looking at corporations, LLCs, nonprofits, partnerships, and sole proprietorships. We'll touch a little bit on some other forms of business entities and business structures after we get through these main 5. But my goal really, as we go through these 5 different types of business entities and business structures, is to kind of compare and contrast them and give you a sense of what type of business structure is going to be the right fit for what type of business owner or what type of entrepreneur. And we're going to do that by looking and comparing these different business structures in light of these 5 different factors: simplicity, personal liability protection, tax status, your ability to raise funding, and management flexibility. Right. And so I want to start kind of on the most complex end of the spectrum and kind of work our way down to the least complex when it comes to business structures. And on the complex end of the spectrum, we have corporations. And a corporation is really just a group of individuals or businesses that are authorized by the state to act as one entity, and that entity has to follow corporate formalities that are set out by that state in terms of how a corporation has to operate. All right, and so a corporation is going to be guided by its bylaws. It's formed by filing articles of incorporation with the state in which you want that corporation to call its home. And for a corporation, there are different corporate formalities that the corporation has to follow. The main one is that a corporation has to have a board of directors. And so what that means for the corporation and what that means for the business owners is that the people who own the business and can partake in its profits, and those are the shareholders, they're not the ones who technically are in control of the business. Control of the business belongs to the board of directors, right? And so what you see with a corporation is a corporation basically splits those typical rights of ownership in a business between the shareholders and the board of directors, again, with the shareholders having the right to partake in the profits and the board of directors having the right to direct the company. All right. A corporation also issues shares. And so, that actually leads to one of the biggest advantages of that corporate structure is that a corporation is the best form of business entity for raising capital, especially if you're looking to raise money from venture capitalists or third party investors, people who don't have a personal relationship with you. A corporation, because of the fact that it's able to issue shares and that in the long run, a corporation has the ability to offer those shares on a public stock exchange through an initial public offering, something of that nature. Because of that fact, there's more that you can kind of do, and it's more enticing to a venture capitalist or someone who is looking to invest money into a company that's owned by someone that they don't have a personal relationship, right? Because at the end of the day, for these venture capitalists, they go into those investments looking at what does the long-term return look like? And they want to know that on the table is the ability to take this company public, right? And so corporation is the best form of entity for raising capital. Corporation also has personal liability protection for the shareholders who are the owners of the business. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means and where that comes from and all of that in a minute. But a corporation also has choice of tax treatment. So when you create a corporation on the state level by filing your articles of incorporation, that creates the business entity. But then when you go to register that business with the IRS, that's the point at which you'll really choose how that business is going to be treated from a tax standpoint. So a corporation may be treated as a S Corp, which has pass-through tax treatment, or as a C Corp, which has double tax treatment. The difference between the two with an S Corp, that pass-through tax treatment means that the corporation is not paying income tax on the profits that it makes, but rather it's passing those profits along to the owners of the business, to the shareholders, and then the shareholders will pay income tax on the dividends and the profits that are attributed to them. With a C Corp has double tax status, which basically means that the corporation is going to pay taxes on that income that it brings in. And then as it distributes that profit in the form of dividends to the shareholders will also have to pay taxes on that income. And so in case you're wondering why someone would want to do that, there could be tax benefits for someone depending upon what tax bracket they sit in, right? And so, definitely some things to think about there, and especially with tax being a big consideration when it comes to choosing what type of business entity is going to be right for you. The relative disadvantages of a corporate structure mainly come in terms of the complexity, right? So as I mentioned, a corporation has to maintain certain corporate formalities. And so those corporate formalities in terms of having a board of directors, having to have meetings of those board of directors, having to have them vote to make certain corporate decisions, having to take minutes of those meetings, so on and so forth. it's more to manage. And so there's a greater level of complexity, which means, there's just going to be greater time and cost, whether it's money or time, that you're going to have to spend in terms of setting that up and also managing it as you move forward. So it's one of those things. And I always say, when it comes to complexity, it's best to keep it ASAP, as simple as possible, right? We want to keep things simple until we need to add complexity in there to kind of get us to that next level. The other relative disadvantage is that you can have relatively limited management control. That's especially going to come into play if you are, trying to bring in investment from outside investors. They're going to want a seat on the board in a lot of cases, or if they don't want a seat on the board, they're going to want certain say over certain decisions, veto power over certain decisions, right? So it can be a little bit more difficult to sort of maintain control of the business, not impossible. But a lot of times you are looking at potentially giving up control as you kind of bring more people into the business. Next, we have LLCs, and I'm sure that most of you are familiar, at least somewhat, with LLCs and what they are, because they're the most popular form of business entity, especially for self-funded entrepreneurs. And a lot of that comes into play because an LLC kind of gives you the best of both worlds in terms of giving you the personal liability protection that comes from having a corporate structure, but the management flexibility that comes from being a partnership or a sole proprietorship, right? So an LLC, similar to a corporation, is set up by filing paperwork with the state. In this case, it's going to be your certificate of organization. And then the kind of document that sits at the center of that kind of outlines how the business is going to be run is your operating agreement. And I want to make a note on operating agreements because you'll see one of the disadvantages here with an LLC is that they present more complexity than people sometimes realize. And that really comes into play with the fact that your business has a certain set of rules that it has to abide by or follow because it's set up under state law, right, in terms of your LLC. And so what a lot of people don't realize is if they don't have a written operating agreement where they've kind of outlined how they want the business to run, it doesn't mean that they don't have an operating agreement. It just means that the operating agreement that they have is the one that the state has given them, which is going to be the state statute, right? So the state statute, the rules that the state has established are going to determine how your business is run and the rules by which it has to operate, right? And the disadvantage that can come into play with that is if you don't have a written operating agreement, sometimes you'll have rules that you're unaware of, that if you were making the decisions, you would not have chosen those rules, right? So for example, and this is especially true with folks who are in a business partnership, if you have business partners and you're starting an LLC, I had one situation with a client where they came to me, I was helping them with a contract, but in the course of helping them with that, I actually found out that their first business, they had to shut it down because what happened was they had a business partner. That business partner took out a loan in the name of the business without them knowing. That business partner then kind of, fell by the wayside, disappeared. But then a couple of years later, this company that they had taken a loan from came to them and said, hey, your business took this loan, you still owe this money, you gotta pay it back. And they had no clue, right? That when you have an LLC, if you don't have a written operating agreement, the rule by default is that any one of the LLC members can make a decision that binds the entire company. Right. And if that's something that you don't want to be the case, if you want everyone to have to agree on a decision or agree on something that binds the company, then you've got to change that in your operating agreement. And so the company ended up being liable for that. The company ended up, not being able to pay back the loan, and they kind of had to start all over again. And so again, there's a little bit more complexity there than people realize. So you want to make sure that you have an operating agreement that really lays out how the business is supposed to be run according to what you would want. The advantages of an LLC are going to be the flexibility. So as I mentioned, an LLC kind of has the flexibility of a partnership or a sole proprietorship, and that there are certain rules that the LLC has to follow, but there are a lot fewer than there would be with a corporation. An LLC also gives the owners, who are also known as members, personal liability protection, which means that their assets are not on the line when it comes to business debts, right? And so again, we'll talk a little bit more about what that means and what that looks like in a couple minutes. But an LLC also has choice of tax treatment, right? So when you set up an LLC, and I often get questions where people will ask, well, I'm an LLC, but people are saying I'm a sole proprietor, or I want to switch from an LLC to an S Corp. The important thing to understand is that an LLC, there's no separate tax category for LLCs in the IRS's tax code, right? So when you form your LLC, by default, for tax purposes, it's either going to be treated as a sole proprietor if you're the only person in the business, or it will be treated as a partnership if you have more than one member in the business, right? But you can also file paperwork with the IRS to choose to have your LLC treated as an S Corp, a C Corp, or even a nonprofit, right? And so an LLC has kind of the full range of choice of tax treatment. And so that's one of the things to consider when you're deciding how will I start my business, kind of what's going to be the right business entity for me, is understanding the difference between kind of on that state level, like the entity that you've created, and then the choices that you'll have from a tax perspective in terms of how that business entity is going to be treated for tax purposes. Last but not least, an LLC can sell portions of the business in order to raise money. So this can be particularly effective if you're looking to raise money from friends, family members, and kind of bring them on into your business. But it's going to be less effective than a corporation would be, because you're not issuing shares and you're not able to kind of sell shares ultimately on a public stock exchange. Now, you could always change your business entity or have some sort of merger where that, ultimately that's something that you're able to do. But that might not be as appealing to someone who is a third-party investor who has no relationship with you, right? And then next we have nonprofits, right? And so the thing that I want to point out about a nonprofit is that a nonprofit, when you go to set up a nonprofit in Pennsylvania, a nonprofit could be a nonprofit corporation, so a nonprofit corporate entity. And as I mentioned, an LLC could also be structured and set up as a nonprofit. So a nonprofit isn't necessarily its own type of business entity, although it is, you can form a nonprofit corporation in Pennsylvania and all of the other states in the US. But again, you can also form a nonprofit that's an LLC. There aren't necessarily any added benefits of doing that. There may be some situations where they are, but generally speaking, an LLC that's a nonprofit is going to have to follow the same rules and stipulations as a nonprofit corporation, because a lot of those rules are set out in the IRS's tax code, right? So in terms of nonprofits, the advantages that you're going to have there is that the business is income tax exempt as long as you're following the rules set out for your nonprofit entity, right? So if the nonprofit, if all of the income and all of the assets of the nonprofit are going towards that nonprofit purpose, then the income, whether it's through grants or whether it's through actually offering services, are going to be exempt from taxes. And so that makes it a little bit easier for the business to operate, right? One less thing that you have to worry about paying. Nonprofits give personal liability protection to the board of directors, similar to a corporation, right? They're going to be the ones who are making the decisions. And then the nonprofit is going to have greater access to grants and donations, right? And so people are going to have an interest in giving to a nonprofit because they know that ultimately at the end of the day, the purpose of the nonprofit is not to make profit for the company, but the purpose is supposed to be for that company to do some good out in the public, right, and out in the world. So that might be a helpful way for folks in terms of how do I get funding to kind of do this mission-led work or this mission-based work that I want to do. The relative disadvantages of a nonprofit, again, a nonprofit is going to operate similar to is going to operate basically as a corporation. It's just not going to have shareholders. And so the board of directors is responsible for making decisions. A nonprofit can have members, which may be helpful if you want those members to have not necessarily strategic control over kind of day-to-day, how do things work. But if you want those members to have control over who's on the board of directors, so that might be a good way to kind of maintain control, right? If you're a founder of a nonprofit and you're worried about, my board of directors going rogue, you can make yourself a member of the nonprofit, which doesn't mean that you own it, but it could give you the right to say and determine who's on the board of directors and make decisions to remove people from the board of directors. So kind of maintaining control. But, because you're operating as, basically the same way as a corporation, there's that added complexity. You can't own a nonprofit, right? So at the end of the day, whatever income comes into the nonprofit, it's not the sort of thing where you're building generational wealth outside of maybe the connections that you may be building in the community, right? Building an ecosystem around that nonprofit that ultimately benefits everyone involved. But you don't own the profits, right? The assets that belong to the nonprofit don't belong to you. And then, I talked a little bit about, kind of maintaining control. So I want to just use this kind of as a quick little break to kind of distinguish the first three types of business structures that we talked about from the last two, right? Because all of the first three business structures that we talked about are going to be separate legal entities, meaning that they have a separate legal identity from the people who own it or the people who have founded those businesses, right? And so it's important for me to point this out because this is where the whole personal liability protection comes from, right? So the reason why members in an LLC or shareholders of a corporation have personal liability protection is because the business and the people who own it are separate legal entities. So the same way that the law, generally speaking, wouldn't hold me responsible for the debts of, someone else, the laws isn't going to hold me responsible, generally speaking, for the debts that belong to my business, right? So that means that if my business gets sued or if my business owes money and can't afford to pay it back, generally speaking, my personal assets are going to be protected from that debt, right? So my house, my bank accounts, whatever investments I have, whatever, property I own, whoever my business owes, they're not going to be able to collect from my personal assets in order to collect on that debt, right? So it's important, though, to point out, right? The other thing that I want to point out before I go further on that is that the added benefit also of having a separate legal entity in addition just to the personal liability protection is that that business entity actually becomes an asset for you, right? Because it becomes something that you can sell in whole or in part. It becomes something that you can use as an investment vehicle. Right. So there is an added benefit there as well to having that separate legal entity and that it builds value. It can build value in and of itself, especially if you're running the business correctly. It can become something that, has a value of its own that you can use to leverage, you can use in a lot of different ways. But getting back to the personal liability protection, because I know that this is a reason why a lot of people choose to form their business as an LLC or as a corporation, right? Because they want that extra layer of protection. It's important to understand that that extra layer of personal liability protection is not absolute. Which means that it's not going to protect you from everything, right? So it's really important to think about the 5 different ways that you can protect your business from risk. One of them is going to be that layer of personal liability protection that you get from creating a separate business entity. But the others are going to be insurance, contracts, building a team of experts around you who can help guide you and help you understand when you're walking into trouble or what the potential risks are. And last but not least, business planning, right? So there are a lot of different ways to protect your business from risk. Don't think that just because I have an LLC, it means that no one can sue me, right? So for example, if you're negligent if you're personally negligent and your negligent injures someone, you're still going to be sued. And it doesn't matter if you were driving the company van or if someone slipped in your store, or if made a recommendation to someone for a dietary supplement that ended up interacting wrong with one of their medications, right? You have, a personal responsibility to make sure that you're acting in a reasonable way. And if you're acting in an unreasonable way and you injure someone, even if you're doing it in the capacity as a business owner, that's something that you can still be sued for. And the other thing that I want to mention about that, the last piece, is it's very important to understand that you can also lose your personal liability protection. And the number one way that people lose that protection is by commingling funds. What I mean by that is treating assets that belong to the business as if they belong to you personally, right? So, one of the things that you definitely have to make sure that you do, and I'll go through the steps of setting up and kind of business formation in one of our later slides, but you want to make sure that you open a separate business bank account. One, that's going to help you to kind of maintain separate finances so you can really kind of get a good picture of the health of your business, what your profits are, what you're losing, expenses, all of that. Two, opening a business bank account is going to be a great way for you to get started on that road to building credit for your business. But three, when you commingle funds, what can happen? Remember that personal liability protection comes from the fact that you and your business are separate entities, right? And so if you are treating the business's money as if it belongs to you personally, right? And you're putting it in a personal account, you're paying your phone bill with it, you go on vacation with it, you pay Johnny's college bill with it this month, whatever the case may be. If your business does get sued, the court is going to look into, the business's funds, right? If you say, well, we can't afford to pay it, of course, going to look into the funds of your business and how you've managed the business financially. And if they see that you've been basically dipping into and using the business's funds as personal funds, the court might say, well, you haven't been recognizing the legal separation between the two. So we're not going to give you the benefit of recognizing the separation between the two either. And we're going to it's called piercing the corporate veil. We're going to allow this person who you owe to collect from you personally because you weren't recognizing the legal separation between the two. So make sure, and if you haven't done it yet, I'm not saying it to scare the life out of you or anything like that, but make sure if you have an LLC, if you have a separate business entity, especially that you go ahead and you open up a business bank account for your business. So the next two forms of business entities that I want to go through are business structures, meaning that they're not separate legal entities from the people who own them, right? And so there are partnerships. And when I say partnerships, I'm talking about a general partnership. There are limited partnerships and limited liability partnerships, which look more like LLCs. But a partnership, just in terms of a general partnership, is really just established by two or more parties or businesses coming together and making an agreement to pursue a common goal, right? So it's simple to establish a general partnership. Really, you just come to an agreement, and that partnership agreement is going to outline what the rules and obligations are in terms of how everyone has to operate. And so that gives you a lot of flexibility, right? Because really, whatever you put in that operating agreement, whatever you put in that partnership agreement, that's how that business is going to run. Right. There are also, in terms of disadvantages for a partnership, because the partnership and the people who own it or the people who are part of it are one and the same, there's no personal liability protection. And then you also can't sell a portion of the business. So you can sell assets belonging to the business, but the business itself is the same thing as the people who are part of it. So if you bring in a new partner to your general partnership, it creates a new partnership, it creates a new business, which there can be extra stuff that you have to do from that standpoint. And then there's no choice of tax treatment or tax flexibility. A partnership is a partnership for tax purposes. And then last but not least are sole proprietors, right? And sole proprietors really just means the person who owns and runs the business and the business itself. They're one and the same from a legal perspective, right? And from a tax perspective too. So a sole proprietorship is the simplest form of business entity to start up. It's the simplest form of business entity to manage because it's up to you to decide how the business is going to be run. There's no one else to share control with. One thing in terms of a sole proprietorship, generally speaking, you don't have to file anything to start a sole proprietorship. You really can just start doing business. However, if you're doing business under a name that's different from a legal name, so like different from your actual name, you're going to have to register a DBA, right? So for example, if I start a plumbing business and I name it Zane Johnson Plumbing, I can operate that business that way because it's clear to everyone that Zane Johnson Plumbing is Zane Johnson the plumber, right? But if I'm operating that business as Pinnacle Plumbing, I'm going to have to register a DBA so that, so that everyone in the public knows that Pinnacle Plumbing is Zane Johnson operating as a sole proprietor. The disadvantages of a sole proprietorship, I think, are pretty obvious, right? There's no relative tax advantages in terms of, your tax as a sole proprietor, your no personal liability protection. And then you have the fewest fundraising opportunities because it's really whatever you can get in the form of a loan or what you bring to the table in terms of, the funds that you have to put towards starting the business. But I will say, because I know a lot of professionals often will discourage people from starting as a sole proprietor, which I think generally speaking is the case. But it's important. I want to point out that there are situations where it makes sense to start as a sole proprietor. The main situation is going to be when you are looking to kind of explore what it would be like to start and run a business in a particular industry, but you're not sure if you see yourself doing that long term, right? And so if you want to try something, you're like, but I don't know if in 12 months, if in 2 years, I'll still be running this business. Starting as a sole proprietor might be the way to go because you can start the business easily. You can get going, you can run it, you can come up with other ways to protect yourself from risk. And then if you decide that you want to continue running the business, you can form an LLC at that point, or you can just shut the business down, which is a lot easier to do as a sole proprietor than it is as an LLC or a corporation that's already started operating. And I say this to you from it's not just like theory. This is actually how I started my firm, right? So when I started my law firm in 2019, I was going out on my own, but my wife is in the military and she was getting stationed down in Bethesda at Walter Reed in Maryland. So I knew at some point I would be moving down there with her. But I didn't know if I would take the firm with me and transfer it to Maryland, if I would continue to run the firm from Maryland virtually, or if I would just shut it down and go find a job. But I wanted to get out there and start doing it, right? I was ready to take that leap. And so I protected myself from risk through malpractice insurance, contracts, that sort of thing. And then when the pandemic hit and everyone went into lockdown, I figured out, okay, I can run this business virtually. And at that point, I formed an LLC, right? So there are situations where starting your business as a sole proprietor can make sense, or starting your business as a partnership can make sense for your business. So as I mentioned, I'm going through I went through those 5 types of business structures because they're kind of the main ones that people operate under. But there are other types of business entities, right? There are cooperatives, co-ops, where ownership of the business is shared among everyone who is a part of it, or if it's a nonprofit, everyone who's a part of it is a member and they have a certain level of control or say over decisions that are made or how the business is going to be run. Companies such as LLCs and corporations can be set up as benefit companies, which is sort of like a mix between a nonprofit and a for-profit, where basically your business is a for-profit business, but you're making the commitment to the public when you set that business up that, hey, we're a for-profit business, but we also have a larger purpose than just making profit, right? So we're benefiting the community or some other group in some sort of measurable way, right? And so that's, another type of business, and there's a benefit there in terms of people care about the businesses that they work with and the companies that they work with. They care about what their values are, right? And so there's, some added benefit potentially there, being able to advertise your business as a benefit company that's committed to benefiting the community. There are limited liability partnerships and limited partnerships, which look a little bit more closely to what an LLC looks like. And then there are also professional companies, which are basically, if you're in a licensed profession such as law, doctors, podiatrists, vets, veterinarians, you may have to register your business as a professional company if you're providing those services within your business. Then, of course, there are, what's the other one that I'm thinking about? There are DAOs, right? So, there are all different types of business entities. I encourage you to kind of, do some research and due diligence on your own if you haven't decided what's going to be right for you. But hopefully all of that is kind of a good, primer, and hopefully maybe even gave you all the information that you feel like you need to kind of make the right decision for you. Right. And so what are the actual steps then for, forming your business? Right. So if you've gone through, you've, kind of considered all of the advantages and disadvantages and considered them in the context of your particular situation. What are the next steps? Like, once I've decided what I want to do, how do I actually form that business? So here are the general steps, pretty much regardless of what type of business entity or business structure you want to go with. It's going to kind of follow these 6 steps, right? So first and foremost is business planning, which hopefully this workshop, we can consider that a piece of that process. But I definitely want to encourage everyone to spend that time to put together or do some business planning. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to put together a 30-page business plan that you would take into a bank and try to get a loan. It might be a business model canvas. It might be putting together a slide deck, whatever the case may be. Spend some time thinking through what the opportunity looks like. What does growth look like for you? And then also, what are the challenges and risks that you're going to have to address? Because that's going to help you as you move forward. Number one, it's going to help you making the best decision to put yourself in the best position possible to address all of those potential outcomes. And it's also going to help you prepare yourself to already kind of be in that mindset of, what are the things that could pop up? And how do I want to address them if they do, right? Or who do I want to go to get help addressing those problems, right? Once you've kind of decided what direction you want to go in, filing the appropriate paperwork with the state is going to be your next step, right? So for a LLC, that's going to be your certificate of organization. For a corporation or a nonprofit, in most cases, going to be your articles of incorporation. And if you're running a sole proprietorship or a partnership, you may need to register a DBA or a fictitious name, as I mentioned, if you're not going to be operating under the legal name of a recognized entity or individual. After you file the paperwork with the state, your business entity has existence, but you still want to register and apply for an EIN with the IRS. So the only type of business structure where you're not going to need an EIN is going to be a sole proprietorship that has no interest or anything in doing any type of hiring. But even if you're a sole proprietor, in most cases, there's going to be some benefit to applying for that EIN because it also kind of gives the potential there for your business kind of longer term to kind of start establishing some of those things that are going to be important for its growth, such as credit. Right. And so applying for an EIN is going to kind of be the next step there. Once you kind of set your business up in that fashion, it exists on the state level. It has its EIN, which is kind of like a social security number on the federal level. You want to decide whether or not you need to make any adjustments to how it's going to be treated from a tax perspective. Right. So we talked about certain forms of business entities having flexibility from a tax status perspective, right? With a corporation, when you go to set up that EIN, it's going to ask you what type of, how that business is going to be treated from a tax perspective. So in that sense, like steps 3 and 4 kind of combine for a corporation. But for an LLC, your LLC is going to be treated by default, remember, as either a sole proprietorship or partnership for tax purposes. So if you've talked with your tax professional, or whoever is giving you tax advice, and it's clear to you that there's going to be some sort of benefit with going with a different type of tax treatment for your LLC. You need to file the appropriate form within the appropriate amount of time after starting your business or after the start of a new tax year in order to select that type of tax treatment that you want to move forward with. So now you've got your business set up, you've got your EIN, you've decided how your business is going to be treated from a tax perspective. Next is executing your governing documents, right? And so your operating agreement, your bylaws, your partnership agreement or your founders agreement, you may have a shareholders agreement, but executing those agreements, especially if you have multiple business partners, is going to be crucial to making sure that you address all of those things at the outset that are most likely to arise and cause problems long term, right? Because especially when you're in a partnership, it's very difficult once the problem has already come up to actually come to an agreement on how you're going to handle it. Because at that point, everyone's interests are no longer aligned necessarily, right? Like one person might want one thing because it's going to benefit them, and another person might want something else. It's going to be of more benefit to them, right? And so it's harder at that point to kind of bring everyone together and come to an agreement. And a lot of times, those sorts of things can lead to the end of that business relationship. And so spending the time to put something in writing between you and your business partners is definitely going to be an essential piece of making sure that your business is formed and ready to go moving forward. And then last but not least, I mentioned this before, opening that business bank account is going to be important. Again, if you've got, a corporation, nonprofit, or an LLC, it's going to be important to protecting your personal liability protection and making sure that you're keeping that layer of protection from risk. But even if you don't, it's going to help you with establishing a relationship with an institution that may offer you credit down the line, right? And then it's also going to be an easy way for you to manage your business's finances, right? So it's an easy way for you to just have something that's separate, see what the business is spending, see how the money is coming in, and just really get a sense for that cash flow. And also come tax time, right? It's just going to make things a lot simpler for your business. So that brings us really to the kind of end of what I wanted to go over and what I wanted to talk through. But I just want to kind of do a quick recap of what I hope the key takeaways are before I just open it up and see if there are any final questions before we wrap it up. And I want to encourage you again, do your homework in terms of taking the time to do some business planning. Right. It's so important to kind of just take that time to really get a sense of where am I trying to go and what's my plan for getting there. That plan is going to change. I can guarantee you that. I would bet the house on it. That plan is going to change because there are things that you don't know that you don't know. Right. So once you start operating the business, you'll have to make adjustments. But having that plan written out, again, whether it's a business model canvas or it's a slide deck or whatever is most helpful for you, it could be a flow chart, it could be, it could be anything, whatever's helpful for you. Think about what the purpose of that document is, but get it in writing so that you have something to visit and look back at as your plans change, and it'll keep you focused on what it is that you are trying to accomplish, right, and how you want to go about it. Understand again, and I said before, one of the reasons people start LLCs and corporations is because they want that personal liability protection. Remember that it's not absolute. So you'll want to think about the other ways that you protect yourself from risk. Again, that's going to be through, you're going to have your personal liability protection, but on top of that, you want to think about insurance. You want to make sure that your contracts are where they need to be. You want to make sure that you have a team of professionals around you who can help you identify risk and help you minimize it. And then last but not least, you want to take the time to do the business planning, right? So making sure that you have kind of a full risk protection strategy for protecting your business from risk, but then also making sure that you are operating your business according to how the law requires you to, so that you don't lose that personal liability protection, especially when it comes to not commingling funds. And then last but not least, keep it ASAP. All right. Keep it as simple as possible. All right. I get questions all the time from people who reach out and say, I'm thinking about creating a holding company. And then I start talking to them and I'm, trying to get a sense for, well, why do you want to create a holding company? And it really just comes down to a piece of information that they heard about, how other people structure their businesses. But if there's no concrete benefit to doing something, then don't do it, right? If you can't answer, like, what is the concrete benefit of this to me? Is it going to make my business more investable? Is it going to help me protect one line of business from the next? Is it going to help me kind of grow and manage assets within my business, right? If you don't have a specific answer for how doing something a particular way is going to benefit your business in the long run, or in the short run, then keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate things because of what other people are doing. What's right for you is a totally different story from what other people are doing. So keep that in mind. So that brings us to the end, and I appreciate everyone joining in. I see that there's a question about the session. And so quick reminder that this is being recorded and that the video will be shared with all of you, so you can kind of go back through and review it later. I'll also be putting together kind of like a written companion piece to go along with it, just kind of like a bullet point summary to kind of pull out the main pieces from the presentation, so that you have some stuff to kind of help you moving forward with all of this. But appreciate everyone spending some time with us this morning. Appreciate again Philly VIP for this partnership and being able to collaborate in this way. And I'll open it up to see if anyone has questions. And
Hi,
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
good afternoon. This is Stephanie. First, thank you. I had to go in and out, unfortunately, because I got called for another meeting, but I just wondered in general, what do you see are the main pitfalls that you wished people creating startups or may have existing businesses that they want to help grow fall into?
I think the main pitfall is that people don't, I think the main pitfall is people don't always get the right advice before they make a decision to move forward.
Okay.
And I know as a lawyer, it may sound like, I'm saying that because, like, obviously I want everyone to come talk to me about what they want to do before they do it. But it honestly, it is the truth, because I think there's a lot of information out there. And you don't always know someone's intention when they're giving that information out, whether it be YouTube University, or if you're finding something on Google. There's a ton of information out there to kind of help us figure out how things work. But there's a difference between kind of the information and then how it's applied to a certain set of circumstances. And so, like I said, like when people reach out and they're asking, well, should I start a holding company for my business because I want to have a couple different types of businesses? Or, should I get a life insurance policy to fund my business, like a whole life insurance policy? Because they've heard things, but they might not necessarily know how those things apply to their situation. I always think it's best to talk with someone who does it for a living. And whether that's, a private attorney or whether that's, an attorney through an organization like VIP, like talk with someone who does it for a living, who's helped dozens, hundreds, thousands, however many people through that process, because they're going to be able to uncover things that you wouldn't even have known were an issue. And it's interesting too, because I'm at the point, I'm doing something right now where I'm trying to build like a separate product, and I'm going through the process of doing discovery interviews with entrepreneurs who I know and people who I'm just reaching out with and connecting on LinkedIn. And one of the things that I constantly hear from people who are like on their second or third, or they built multiple businesses, is that they wished when they started that they had, talked with someone before they started that business via LegalZoom or via InkFile. Like, those are great tools. They make it easy and simple, but it doesn't relieve kind of that benefit that you're going to get from talking through it with someone who's going to be able to say, okay, what are your goals? What are we looking at? Okay, I think that this is right for you, but I would do something a little bit different. So even if you want to take the do it yourself route, being able to just have someone to kind of go over with you and make sure that you're not missing anything.
That was helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Hopefully I wasn't too long-winded with that answer, but
No, not at all.
any other questions? Awesome. Well, I hope the silence means that I answered all the questions rather than like maybe some of you are asleep. Hopefully that's not the case. But no, all jokes aside, I appreciate everyone again for coming out. My contact information is here, so feel free to use it. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. And Crystal, did you have a question before we wrap it all up?
Yes, hi. Sorry about that. I just didn't know
No.
which one I want to ask. I had a couple. For starters, when you're starting a business, if you are in your first year of business and you don't your business doesn't generate any revenue, do you still have to file for that year even though you didn't make any profit or anything?
Yes, you should, because most likely you spent something on the business, right? And if you took a loss on the business, like even if that was a cost of like setting up your LLC, or the cost of, buying certain things that you may need to kind of get your business up and running, or the cost of going to a conference for, entrepreneurs with ideas, or, going through a program or a masterclass or whatever it may be, whatever you spent on that business through that year is something that you can deduct from profits later on down the line. So it is a good idea to still file the appropriate tax paperwork to make sure that you document that money that you spent, and that you're able to write it off later down the line when your business is making money.
Okay, one more question to that. So if you don't, are you penalized?
No. So they're not going to penalize you for not using deductions, which would ultimately decrease their revenue. So I'm sure they'd be more than happy to allow you to not report those expenses that you took and that you made. But I'll use another disclaimer. I'm not a tax expert. Everything I know from like business taxes is from doing my taxes for a couple years before I threw my hands in the air and was like, I got to give this to someone else. But so, I would say, in terms of your particular tax situation, if you have questions about what you should do, what you should file, who you should file with, talk with a tax expert one-on-one to make sure that you're making the right decisions around that, because taxes aren't something that you want to get wrong. You want to get those right, obviously.
All right. And this is my last question. Can I ask one more?
Sure.
As far as businesses, do you have like a business entity that you would say would be easier to protect legally? As far as like, say, if it's like a cleaning business or a store where you're selling merchandise, that's just a little bit easier to protect legally versus like something that's a bigger company where you're getting more profit, or is it all pretty much the same?
So I would say, and hopefully I kind of answer your question here, but an LLC is kind of the easiest or simplest form of business entity to manage that is like a separate legal entity. And so it gives you that personal liability protection, and it gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of how the business is going to be run. So it's very forgiving to first-time entrepreneurs in terms of if you're not familiar with how a corporate entity typically runs. But again, kind of going back to like the 5 ways that you protect your business from risk, there are 4 other things that you've got to consider there, that all depend upon the industry that you're in and the risks that are associated with that industry, right? So some businesses, some industries are riskier than others. So that's something where I would definitely encourage you to talk to someone one-on-one so that they can get a sense for, okay, what's your risk profile look like? Like what are the risks and challenges that are associated with the type of business that you're going to be running? And, what do we want to consider, not just the type of business entity in terms of protecting you, but also, contracts and, all of the other things that we want to think about. So definitely want to encourage you to talk to someone one-on-one about that, to kind of figure out all the ins and outs.
All right, thank you.
No problem. All right, everyone. Well, I appreciate everyone for joining. In the next couple of days, I'll send out an email, or we'll send out an email with the recording, a link to the recording, as well as some written materials to kind of follow up. And we hope that you'll attend the next webinar in the session. But Nina, do you have anything you want to say to kind of wrap us up?
No, I wanted to say thank you, Zane. That was awesome. I thought that was an excellent presentation, and I'm excited to learn about contracts on the 23rd. Everyone, if you are not already registered for the event on the 23rd, please check out the Philly VIP website or shoot me an email and I'll get you guys set up. It should be a good one. I'm excited.
Absolutely. Me too. Contracts are my favorite topic. And people think I'm joking. Like, I get excited to talk about contracts. So hopefully you all will join and you'll get a chance to see why. But again, I appreciate everyone for coming out. I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon and the rest of your week. And good luck.
Thank you, Zane.
Thank you.